Okay, so the talks this afternoon start with something called Access to Work, which some of you may have heard of, and here to talk about it is Geoff Meade. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to share your afternoon with you. My apologies if I step back from the microphone, just you'll have to keep reminding me. Somebody has never actually participated in anything like karaoke, so I'm not used to microphones, so forgive me. Just a very, very, very brief introduction as to who I am. My name is Geoff. I work for the Department of Work and Pensions. Broadly speaking, the Department of Work and Pensions, we have about 22 million customers, and my particular role currently is on the employment side. When I first engaged with Dave, he asked me to talk about access to work, which was part of my previous job role. So this is why I'm here this afternoon, and just to sort of give you a little bit of a sort of a flavour around access to work. It's something that's been with us since 1994, so it's not a new thing, although for a lot of people they're not aware of it. Perhaps one of the things that the Department of Work and Pensions hasn't been good at over the years has perhaps been promoting access to work. Having said that, we are very much pushing it now, because as a government department we want to increase the numbers of disabled people into the workforce, and at the moment we have quite a disparity between those disabled people in the workforce versus those people who are non-disabled, and we want to kind of reduce that disparity, and one of the ways that we can help that happen is through access to work. So what is access to work? It's first and foremost a grant that is made available to pay for advice, but perhaps more importantly, practical support to help somebody who is perhaps already in work remain in work because of their health condition, or perhaps to help somebody move into work. And especially so, there is also accessibility for people who might be considering self-employment, which has been a sort of a very much a growth area in the economy in recent years. So who is it for? It's realistically for anybody over the age of 16 who is in work or about to go into work. And it can also, in some instances, help people who are currently on an out of work benefit have that opportunity to have support for access to doing the job that they're doing. So there are certain situations where people on an out of work benefit who might be doing some amount of work, but who need the support to enable them to continue that work or carry on, access to work can help them there. In summary, what does it mean? Essentially, under the Equality Act, employers are duty bound to make reasonable adjustments. But in consideration of that, there are some circumstances where an employer may have made a reasonable adjustment, but that reasonable adjustment may not have been quite sufficient to help somebody continue in their job, or perhaps help somebody move in to that job. So again, access to work through the funding, the grant, may enable that employer to make those relevant changes. There are three main considerations that have to be determined. So one is to look at the ways that things are being done in an organisation. Changes that an organisation may need to do to sort of change its kind of physical features. Now that might be, for example, doorways, an adjustment to a doorway to enable wheelchair access, so a widening of a doorway as an example. Probably most commonly is around providing additional equipment to enable somebody to do a job. So it could be around things like keyboards or particular types of screens, for example. The benefits of somebody using access to work: it enables people to continue with their independence and allows them to have greater independence within the work arena. As I mentioned earlier, it helps promote and support people with disabilities moving into the workplace, and those people who are currently in the workplace, enabling those people to stay there, but also to prosper within the workplace, to go along the sort of the promotional scale. And equally, it gives people a greater level of parity with non-disabled colleagues. Importantly, from an employer's perspective, it opens up a huge untapped job pool, because people with disabilities do bring an enormous amount of advantages to employers, and that is something that, again, as an organisation, we are highlighting to employers all the time, and they are recognising the value of employing people with disabilities. It's also a good way that Access to Work can, as part of its role, provide advice to people with disabilities, but also to employers around some of the things that they can do to support and help people within their organisation. So there's sort of what we would say two phases. One is what we call an assessment phase to Access to Work. That's where we would provide advice, and then the more perhaps important areas around the element side, that's really where the funding would come in to provide perhaps some of the more physical changes or adaptations that somebody might require. So, eligibility, the type of help, as I mentioned, it's available to anybody in England, Scotland and Wales. In Northern Ireland they have separate rules, but who is over 16. It's for people who are about to start employment or who, as I mentioned, are currently in a job. And there is just a little bit around the sort of the existing benefit side. As I mentioned, that for some people on existing out of work benefits, they do have an eligibility for claiming access to work, but in terms of somebody that might be in receipt of employment support allowance, they would need to be doing what we call permitted work to be eligible for access to work. So what are the sort of some of the elements that access to work can be used for? So first and foremost, and probably one of the most commonest areas, is around the special aids and equipment that somebody might need to help them do the job that they're being asked to undertake. Adaptations to premises and equipment, so again just sort of thinking about some of the changes that buildings need. Generally speaking, under the reasonable adjustments, lots of employers are perhaps already expected to have made those adjustments, but it could be just to enhance some of those adjustments. Travel to work, for a number of people, perhaps because of their disability, they can't use public transport independently. They may need to take a taxi. As we all know, there's quite a burden with the cost of taking a taxi to and from every day of the working week. So access to work, the grant can be to cover the costs of perhaps a taxi, for example. Also travel in work. Some organisations have multiple sites where people have to move between different sites. So again, there could be support made, financial support, to enable that to happen. Support workers, perhaps somebody might need somebody as a sort of a mentor with them to help them do certain tasks, or just to sort of be with them whilst they're doing their job, or perhaps if they are travelling between multiple sites, to accompany them as they go. Equally, it could be at an interview stage. Interviews are, in the best of times, quite daunting, but equally it can help somebody, a support worker, in terms of communication at that interview stage that somebody might be going through. And equally for people in terms of any mental health condition. So Access to Work can provide support along those lines as well. So just on the sort of mental health support side, it can be there to support helping people going to and from work. If perhaps somebody is sort of absent from work, about sort of looking at, adjustments, how that can be best supported to enable them to be making a more frequent return to work. Or again, for somebody who might be finding it difficult in just making that transition from being sort of at home and getting to work and so on and so forth. So again, looking at the level of support, it could be around an initial assessment of what that person's needs might be. It could be devising a support plan over a period of up to 6 months. And it could just be around sort of signposting to other relevant support that might be there. So that would sort of more come around perhaps on what I mentioned a few moments or so ago around the assessment side, about giving that sort of advice. And we use Remploy to support us on that side of things. So just to give a few examples around the mental health support, it could be just helping somebody keep what is known as a mood diary. It could be to help them use sort of certain memory aids to help them do a job. So it could be something like a mind map, for example, so that kind of pictorial diagrams that we often sometimes come across. And it could just be about developing a sort of a recovery action plan, and so on and so forth. Some of the reasonable adjustments can be flexible working, so that could be around the hours that somebody is undertaking. It could be where somebody has been away from the workplace for a period of time, enabling them to have a phased return to work, so sort of a gradual reintroduction back into their place of work. Again, it could be supporting them with a buddy or a mentor. Perhaps into certain scenarios where people have sort of targets that they have to meet in terms of performance, it might be just to look at reducing those targets to enable them to feel a little bit more relaxed and not sort of feeling under pressure to meet a particular target. So it can be around additional time to complete certain tasks, for example, again. So there are lots of sort of broad ways that we can help through Access to Work to help people move into work or retain the job that they're doing due to a health condition. We have a cost share, and the cost share is borne between the Department of Work and Pensions and the employer. So there's no burden of the employee to pay. It is a grant, but there is an element, depending, which I will come to very shortly, on the size of the company, how much they have to contribute. But there are a number of sort of factors that are taken into consideration. being around whether the applicant is employed or self-employed, how long they've been in their job, the type of help that is required, and as I sort of mentioned, around the size of the organisation, the company they work for. So just to give an idea, for what we sort of term as a relatively small to medium-sized company, we would classify that as being an organisation that has sort of effectively less than 50 employees. So anything that might be needed in terms of cost, the Department of Work and Pensions would cover that cost in full. For a company with a size of between 50 and just 249 people, so just under 250, we have a sort of what we now call a cost share. So we have a threshold. So for a company of that size, the first £500 of whatever the amount is, the company would be asked to pay, and then thereafter we would ask them to pay 20% of the outstanding cost. So if my arithmetic is anywhere near good, as a quick example, for something around £1,000, an employer of that size, so having people of between 50 and 249 employers, they would be asked to pay the first 500, which would leave then £500 outstanding. They would be asked to pay then 20% of that 500, so that's an additional £100. So in total they would pay 600, and the Department of Work and Pensions would cover the remaining £400, just as an example. Naturally, the bigger companies, the threshold does rise for those organisations. They would then pay the first £1,000, and then what's left over, the remaining 20% of, and the department would pick up the balance. For awards that exceed £10,000, the Department of Work and Pensions will cover that award in its entirety. In some cases, it is just purely that advice has been given, in which case there's no need for a cost share between the department and the employer. Sometimes some organisations will meet that whole cost themselves, just purely out of their sort of responsibility as an employer. One of the things that has changed as well in terms of promotion of access to work, effective of April this year, we have increased the amount that is available annually. So it is now £57,000, well, £57,200 annually to an applicant in terms of the support that they can have on an annual basis. So it was worked out on looking at average earnings and then multiplying that by 1.5. The government this year have now looked at that, and they're now looking at average earnings and multiplying it by 2 to give this new figure. So there's a big sort of change there. How do we sort of go about applying for access to work? The applicant will make the initial contact with the Access to Work team. It can be done by telephone, or there are alternative arrangements. Initially, the telephony agent will take the basic details. So in essence, what we would need to know is obviously name, address, national insurance number, details of the employer. And from that, it then gets passed across to another agent, who will then make a follow-up call to the applicant to establish the details that we've got are correct, and just to find out further information. From that, a decision is then made, and obviously as long as we feel that it's appropriate, an award is made. how that would then happen is the employer or the applicant would commission what is needed, order it in a sense. The invoices would be then paid by the Department of Work and Pensions. So that's a sort of in a nutshell how it kind of proceeds. There is quite a bit of information around access to work through the government site gov.uk. It will give you some good overview information there, and equally for employers, if they want to know more about it, there again is a guide for employers around access to work, and they can be contacted by telephone or email if there are any questions. And that is just a very kind of quick overview of access to work. So I don't know if there are any questions anybody might have or anything you want me to kind of go back over. Yes, sir.
Me? Yeah. I just want to point out how useful it is to not only, for instance, I've got a CCTV for access to work, I've got a part of a laptop, I've got, I don't think I need it, I've got JAWS, and I've got Zoom text. Not only do they provide the adaptation for the screens, but they also provide training, which I think is the most important bit. So they will provide training for you on the equipment that they've actually given you. So not only you assess what you need, but the training and the follow-up then. And so if like JAWS at the moment has gone from JAWS 16 to 2018, again, if there's any changes there, you can have some more training. And that's very, very important.
Yeah. And I'm pleased that you are getting the support you need, and to raise that additional element around the add-on training. And it is something that is reviewed, so it's not a once and once only grant. It's reviewed annually. So because as we'll all appreciate, there are fluctuating needs and circumstances do change. So thank you for that.
Somebody here?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Geoff, thanks very much. It's a really interesting talk. Thank you. You mentioned help for self-employment, and self-employment commonly involves going to various different places to work, because you know who your customer's going to be. Would access to work cover those sorts of fares?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very much about looking at what your need is. It's hard to be kind of definitive without, because unfortunately I'm not sort of an access to work decision maker, if you like. But it would be about, I mean, one of the things you could look at if you find that you can't use sort of transport by yourself, or the costs of transport are prohibitive because of the nature of your condition, etc. They will look at fares for you. As I mentioned, the example of taxi fares, for example. So yes, that is something that can be covered through. Several colleagues that I've worked with in my own department have support with taxi fares because they can't use trains, etc. in the way that some of us do.
Oh, I've got loads. Never here first. Your hand is up just run this way.
I think there needs to be more thought about what constitutes travel to work or travel to other places, because a lot of people are perfectly able to use the bus, but it's finding their way around, it's finding addresses, it's it's not that simple, especially if you're visually impaired, actually, never mind other additional disabilities. So it's not actually just about whether or not you can use the transport, it's about that whole associated thing of finding your way around, which is quite stressful for most people.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that entirely. And I think, again, that's maybe where a kind of a buddy might come into to the equation to help somebody, is to have somebody that perhaps can sort of do that, the leading and the directing, etc. So depending on what I would always say to at any given time, always ask the question, is this available? Am I entitled to this? Because often everything is looked at as in isolation, what the individual need is. And so I think, depending on whatever the situation, I don't think anybody should ever sort of feel, oh, I don't think I qualify, or this is for me. Put that kind of thought to one side. Ask the question. Always feel, able to ask, because it's just been one of my little things in life. What's the worst thing somebody can ever say to you? Well, there are lots of things, of course, but the biggest thing is kind of no. And that's probably, if the answer's no, it's no, at least you know. But don't kind of be sort of afraid to ask the question. As we're constantly reminded, there's never any such thing as a silly question. Every question has a relevance to it.
Eleanor.
Okay, basically, as we're talking in terms of visual impairment and Aniridia, I just also wanted to add the possibility of a reader at work for a certain number of hours per week, because that's one area where a lot of us might have difficulties.
Yeah, no, and I think there's examples where that has been provided.
Sorry, I'm just wiping the dog slicks.
Hi, I've had 3 access to work assessments over the last 10 years, but I've never actually had an annual review. It's always required me to initiate the process again. So I was just wondering, how is the annual review supposed to work?
Well, it will look at, when they make the award, it's done on an annual basis, but equally, at the end of that, the applicant needs to obviously come back to access to work to ask us to look at it, for the following year, depending on what their circumstances are. So there isn't necessarily an automatic follow-up. It has to, as you've experienced, sort of have to come from the applicant. But each award is done on an annual basis, so depending on what the review is or the circumstance of that year, as we'll all appreciate, we have sort of fluctuating conditions that, unfortunately for some situations, health conditions do deteriorate, get progressively worse, so circumstances do change.
I would be quite interested to know if you know how much weight is put on what the person who comes and assesses you is, because I was assessed for access to work, but then quite a lot of the things that the assessor said that she felt that I would need and would be appropriate was then I was told that I wouldn't be getting, and so I got completely inappropriate stuff, and so I just kind of would like to know sort of how much weight gets put on what the person coming to assess you gets given, when the decision is made.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting point. Unfortunately, we are human beings, and sometimes human error comes into the equation. And I would always say that if you perhaps feel that where an award has been made and it hasn't adequately addressed your needs, is to come back to us to tell us, because then we need to re-look at what we've done, because somebody may have misinterpreted the circumstances.
That's not actually made very easy, and you're very discouraged from doing that, and given, or at least I was.
Okay, I'm sorry. I mean, I would like to think that that we do relook. No, I appreciate that, but I do fully understand what you're saying.
If there was like a standard wide, sort of nationwide kind of thing on how much emphasis should be put on what an assessor deemed necessary.
Yeah, it's a difficult one for me to be sort of too exact about, simply because I'm not from access to work.
Yeah.
So I don't really know the full sort of how they look at things and what weight they would put on one thing over another. But I would like to sort of know, because I know throughout our organisation that we have what we call a reconsideration process. So if we make a decision and it's not necessarily the decision that somebody was hoping for, and that there are reasons for us to re-look at that decision, as an organisation we do re-look at those decisions. So that's about the kind of the best way I can sort of describe, I'm afraid. I don't really know what the sort of kind of gets the high score or the mid score, etc. So I apologise for not being able to fully answer your question.
Anyone else? Good. I think that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Oh, they've got a